Hi, I just want to make sure everybody's joining in with us. We will be getting started here in just a few seconds. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Georgia DNR's third Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm Emily Wingo of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources Plain Unit. And first, we've got a couple of little housekeeping issues. We want to make sure everybody understands we're in listen-only mode, so please make sure your mic is muted. If you have any Wi-Fi issues, you may want to turn off your camera and any other programs you have running. Please click on chat to start an in-meeting message with participants. The drop-down on the chat window allows you to chat with everyone or a specific panelist. Please use this chat feature to ask questions and post to everyone during the presentation, as we will not be taking questions by audio. If you're having any technical difficulties, Jeff Butler of Atkins is monitoring the chat box and will try to help you. We are offering 1 hour of continuing education credit for CFMs. We'll be asking poll questions during the session that must be answered, along with giving us your name and email at the end of the presentation. A copy of the presentation will be emailed to all attendees along with a survey that we appreciate you completing so we can improve these webinars in the future. We also plan to post the video on georgiadfarm.com. Okay, with that, let's get started. Today we have a presentation about planning for flood or stormwater projects looking beyond FEMA funding. Our presenter is Barbara Stitt-Allen. For those of you who don't know Barbara, she's a certified floodplain manager and works as a GIS and grant specialist in the grants unit of Georgia EPD NonPoint Source Program. She has worked at the Georgia Environmental Protection Division for 27 years with experience in drinking water, TMDL implementation, and NonPoint source pollution prevention, including 18 years of environmental grant administration and 24 years of geographical information systems. She is a graduate of Agnes Scott College with dual degrees in biology and history and a graduate work in GIS from Georgia State University. So we're extremely appreciative of having someone so steeped in the knowledge of funding opportunities. And with that introduction, I'll turn it now over to you, Barbara.
Oh, well, thank you, Emily. Hello, can everyone hear me? Can you hear me okay? Okay,
yes.
Fantastic. All right, thank you for everyone who's joined us online today. I'm excited to be here to discuss funding of your flood and stormwater projects. So, do you have a local flooding problem in your jurisdiction? Too much water hitting the pavement, impervious surface draining too quickly, causing flash flooding, eroding your streams, causing water quality issues? Do you have old stormwater infrastructure that's overloaded by excessive water now, caused by land use changes upstream? Most local governments know where their problem areas are, but flooding, stormwater, green infrastructure projects, no matter what you try to call them, are very expensive, and funding assistance is also often needed. I've done a version of this presentation at various resilience meetings and conferences off and on about 3 to 4 years. And usually when I start off, I ask the audience about their backgrounds and, in hopes to guide me in sharing more relevant information. So our first polling question is about you. All right. Which best describes your organization or municipality? Are you a consultant contractor trying to help your clients find funding? Are you a city or county with a MPDS, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4? Are you a city or county not covered by MS4? Are you a water authority or other? If you're a city and county and not sure, just say not covered. Go ahead and make your selection. We're going to wrap this up in maybe 10 seconds. I think we're done. Well, we'll go ahead and close the poll. Haven't seen the results yet. Are we ready to have the results? Can't see them. Oh. We're gonna have answers in just a minute. Let's see. Give us 1 minute. All right, now we have some answers. Wow, all right. Looks like majority of you are with a city or county with an MS4. That's great. A couple of you are with a city county without an MS4. Nobody with water authority. That's surprising. A lot of others. I have some coworkers I know they're on the presentation. And one of you is a contractor. All right, so now I have an idea of who my audience is. I thank you everyone for taking this poll question. So let's go ahead and move on. All right, so let's talk about today's agenda. First, I'm going to briefly discuss national and state funding sources that are most commonly used here in the state of Georgia. Next, I'll discuss 2 grants that I help administer, one being the 319 NonPoint Source Grant and the Regional Water Plan C Grant. Since we're going to be accepting applications at the end of the month for 319, I'm going to highlight some requirements of 319 and some green infrastructure projects that we have funded in the past to give you an idea of what kind of projects you can do. I'm also going to highlight the Regional Water Plan C Grant, which can fund several different stormwater activities. And then I'm going to mention other grant resources and some available grant training. And last but not least, I'm going to wrap this up with advice from a funder's point of view to help you with your grant or loan application. Since I have a limited amount of time, I'm only presenting a brief overview of funding sources. However, at the end of the presentation, I've included internet links to various funding sources as references that I've mentioned here today. So don't feel like you have to write down everything I'm saying, all right? This presentation is being recorded in January 2021. In the future, there may be changes or new funds available, but the presentation is a reflection of what is available today. So let's move on. All right, so we're not supposed to talk about FEMA, but we have to acknowledge the amazing planning and funding resources through the Georgia Emergency Management Homeland Security Agency. This is the agency that administers the FEMA grants for the state of Georgia. Typically, when I do this presentation, the representatives from GMA go first, and then I stand up afterwards, and I usually say, after you've talked to GMA, here are the next resources you need to see for funding. For those of you who are not familiar with GMA and you need funding for your flood projects, they should be the funding provider you contact first. Your municipality must participate in the National Flood Insurance Program and have an approved FEMA hazardous mitigation plan to be eligible for any funding from GMA. GMA administers several FEMA-funded grants and programs, but I wanted to highlight the new Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, or BRIC, which replaces the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program. Year 2020 was the first year GMA accepted BRIC applications. The priorities are public infrastructure projects, projects that mitigate risk to one or more lifelines, such as hospitals, projects that incorporate nature-based solutions, and increase funding to facilitate the adoption and enforcement of building codes. My colleagues at GMA asked me to communicate to you guys that for 2020, GMA anticipates they're going to start accepting pre-applications in early fall. However, they asked me to let you know, if you're planning to pursue BRIC funding, please contact them starting next month, February 2021, to allow enough time to develop your project details and make your final application stronger when it's presented to FEMA. So we're not going to talk about FEMA, but GMA does such great work, so I have to acknowledge them. Let's move on. All right, when someone asks me, where can I go to find government grants, I always tell them to start with grants.gov. This is the e-government initiative that is practically the clearinghouse of all federal grants across federal government. This is a centralized place where all federal agencies have to advertise their grants. I always recommend new users to register with grants.gov and put in search keywords such as flood, stormwater, water quality, wastewater, whatever, and such, and you will receive announcements directly via email, or you can sign up with their Twitter to find out what new and exciting grants are becoming available. Another wonderful resource is the Grants Learning Center that's available on grants.gov. They have a fantastic online training program called Grants 101 that will help you learn how to make your grant application stronger and more competitive. Moving on, we have EPA.gov. Now, okay, I recommend EPA.gov because while Most of the EPA grants should appear on grants.gov. Every once in a while, EPA has a special program grant or some special funding out of nowhere, and they will advertise just on their webpage. Many of these grants go directly to municipalities or nonprofits. So I recommend that you subscribe to the EPA grant listserver on their webpage to stay up to date for the latest announcements. They also have great training available also on this webpage. All right, moving on to the next source is the USDA Rural Development Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program. This program provides funding typically very low interest loans for drinking water, sewer, and stormwater drainage for very, very small communities. This funding source is only available to rural areas and towns with population less than 10,000. Depending on the circumstances, grant funds might be offered with the loan. The last time I spoke to the director of this program in Georgia, he mentioned that while this funding source will pay for stormwater projects, they have yet to fund one in Georgia. So I'm hoping maybe somebody that's attending our presentation today might be the first. All right, moving on to DCA Community Development Block Grants. The Department of Community Affairs competitive community development block grants are funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. This program provides funding for a whole wide range of activities, but normally water and sewer lines, including stormwater projects, which are labeled as street and drainage improvement, are included. All projects must substantially benefit low and moderate income public. So typically community block grants are usually given out to non-metro and large urban areas. So mainly it goes out to more rural to medium to smaller towns and counties. The max amount per applicant is $750,000 for a single activity. Now, this is important. They will only award 1 year, and then the next year you're not allowed to apply, except if you're a participant in the Water First program, which I'll discuss in just a moment. All right, next funding source is GIFA. That's the next slide. GIFA, the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority, or GIFA, AKA we call them at EPD, the bank. It has amazed me over the years how many cities and counties were not even aware of this fantastic agency. This agency provides low interest loans for water, wastewater, stormwater infrastructure, reservoir, all kinds of different things. They also do energy, efficiency, water conservation, all different types of things. And they offer several different funding programs that you can see there, but we're going to talk about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund in the next slide. All right, the Clean Water Revolving Fund. Oftentimes the Clean Water is just, oftentimes people think a Clean Water State Revolving Fund is just for wastewater infrastructure. People are used to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, but a lot of times people think it's just for wastewater infrastructure, building a new plant, building new wastewater lines, pump stations, and such. However, the Clean Water SRF also funds through low interest loans a variety of stormwater and non-point source control projects, such as green infrastructure projects. Typically, I've talking to my colleagues at GIFA, they don't get enough projects for stormwater and non-point source projects because a lot of people don't realize that they can offer funding for that. So I'm just trying to make this information available. One exciting thing that GIFA has recently done is they have taken over the Water First program from DCA, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Thanks. This other great program is that GIFA now offers is Water First. It was originally starting with House and DCA, and GIFA took it over about 2-3 years ago and has expanded, and it's just an amazing program. The Water First program recognizes local governments that achieve excellent in water resources. To achieve this designation, you have to do above and beyond in major categories such as watershed assessment, stormwater master planning, wastewater, water supply planning and protection, water conservation, water reuse, education outreach, and regional water planning. Once a community is designated a Water First community, there are so many benefits, including you get a 1% interest reduction from GIFA loans. Remember I mentioned earlier about community block grants, how you can't apply every year. If you're a water first community, they will allow you to apply every year for community block grants. And for us at 319, you get priority status. You all get extra points in our scoring. I can't preach enough about how wonderful a program that Water First is. And if you are, like I said, a city or county, I would highly recommend to look into this program and look into becoming a Water First designated community. Moving on, last thing I wanted to talk about with GFA is the rate sheets. All right, I downloaded this a couple of days ago and called my friend at GFA and said, am I reading this correctly? Because if you look in the black box and you look where you see the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and then at the 5-year loan, 0.15, and then you look at the Water First below it, 0%. If you go across, especially the Water First line, if you go across the line to a 25, 30-year loan, that is the interest rate of your loan. So if you get a 30-year loan and you're a Water First community, your interest rate is 0.86%. That's amazingly cheap. I mean, it's GFA is just practically giving away their money here. And again, even then, I mean, just if you do a project straight out of the straight Clean Water State Revolving Fund, those interest rates are very, very competitive. And in some cases, depending on your situation, GFA may actually give you some principal forgiveness. It's a case-by-case basis. So if you have a larger stormwater, flooding, green infrastructure type project, I would highly recommend you talk to GFA. They are interested in funding these type of projects, and they just don't get enough coming across being offered to them for them to fund. So I just want to make sure you all are available. The Clean Water SRF funds more than just wastewater. All right, moving on. All right, the other thing I want to talk to you about is, well, you're probably wondering, do you funders actually talk and interact with one another? There seems to be a lot of overlap. And it's true, there is some. But actually, we do. We interact often through the Georgia Funders Forum. This is actually it's not really official, but it's a loose conglomerate of funders who've been meeting off and on quarterly for about almost 10 years now. Typically, we get together and there will be a special speaker to come in and talk about all different types of grants. And I have learned so much just participating in the Funders Forum. We have a quarter meeting of the agencies, and we basically talk about all those type of funds that could fund water-related projects in Georgia. The great thing about the Funders Forum is now they're sponsored by GFA, so we're really having more consistent meetings now, and it's being coordinated by IB Environmental. But the cool thing I want you to be aware of, which is in the next slide, the cool thing I want you to be aware of is the past 2 years, we've been having the Funders Forum workshop. And the workshop is for you, those of you that need funding. 2 years ago, we did it at Dalton, in person in Dalton. Oh, those wonderful days. And what was wonderful is the cities and counties and authorities could come into the room and interact with those of us who are the funders. And we had several of the grants and loans that I've talked about already were included in the workshop, and then they were able to find some additional, more detailed information. Back in October, we had to move online because, of course, the pandemic, and it still was quite successful, in my opinion. So if you go to the Funders Forum workshop page, you can go and sign up into the sign up. You can sign up to get the newsletter, but when you sign up, you then can access the webinars and all the things that we filmed from the October 2020 webinar, and you'll get notices when we have the 2021 workshop that is supposed to happen sometime in the fall. It's still unknown whether or not it's going to be in person or online, but it's definite that we're going to have one in the fall. This is a great opportunity for you to interact and learn more about several of these grants I've already discussed, and then some. All right. And last thing I think I have to talk about, the next one is something else that's available to you from the Funders Forum is our funding list. This list is updated about, I'd say 2, 3, 4 times a year. This is a funding list of all things water, not just stormwater, flooding, green infrastructure, but all things water, drinking water. And we make this available. This is available on the Funders Forum webpage, and you can go in and find information about several of the items that several of the grant funds that I've already talked about, and then maybe some others that you haven't seen. This is an excellent, excellent resource I want to make sure you're aware of. Whew, I think we need a break. Emily, do we have any questions?
We don't right now. I hope everybody can find the chat box, and please be sure to enter any questions you've got in there so that when we have our next break for questions, we can read through those.
All right. So we don't have any questions at the moment?
No, we don't.
Okay. All right. I took a sip of my coffee. So are y'all ready to continue on? Let's go. All right. So my next funding opportunities are going to be, of course, ones that are near and dear to my heart because they're ones I help administer, which are the Section 319 NonPoint Source Implementation Grant and the Regional Water Plan Seed Grant. All right. So first thing we're going to talk about is the 319 grant. We'll go to the next slide. All right. So the 319 grant provides funding for projects that address impaired waters, have to have impaired water, which is not supporting on the 303D list. And you've got to be implementing a watershed-based plan that has the 9 elements, the EPA, 9 elements of watershed planning. Usually that stops people. Oh, I don't have a plan. I don't know if I have a plan. Guess what? I bet you do. I bet you have a plan. The next slide will show you a list of plans that we've used. All right, so you might have a watershed management plan that already has the 9 elements, or a watershed-based plan. TMDL implementation plans. There was a version of TMDL implementation plans that were standalone plans from 2000 to 2010. Those are still relevant. And of course, TMDL implementation plans are still part of the actual TMDLs. It's Section 7 and all the TMDLs. Watershed protection plans. Those of you with an NPDES discharge permit probably have a watershed assessment and protection plan. Stormwater management program, your SWAMP, which is you have your programs you have to pull together, and then also list off some of the things that you plan on doing with your stormwater. Then there's the Regional Water Council plans, which is what the C grant is also part of. But we also consider the Regional Water Council plan to have elements. And then the focus has to be on, we prefer a HUC 10, which is a small part of a watershed, or smaller, a HUC 12. Now, here's the thing. In Georgia, we've been given the opportunity to do something we call an alternative plan. So if you don't have one or both plans that have all the elements in one plan, guess what? We have a way that you can do this. It's called Summary of 9 Elements, where you can cobble together information from all different types of plans. Do you have a watershed improvement plan because you're a metro district? Do you have a capital improvement plan? Hazardous mitigation plans are not on here, but some of the hazardous mitigation plans show the education outreach that you all went through to determine what are your priorities. That's useful information too. So if you have a listed segment and you want to do some sort of mitigation or BMP there and all that, but you're not quite sure if you got the right plan, come talk to us because we're really good at cobbling together plans. And then you can submit that with your 319 application. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is what we're funding, okay? Again, we're coming back, we are funding impaired waters, the 9 element plans. And remember, I just talked about the alternative plans, okay? Don't let the lack of a plan stop you, okay? The cost share is 60/40, which is a $400,000 limit, which means that'd be 60%. So your in-kind match would be $266,000. We really love seeing projects that are engaged in multiple partnerships. Those we give higher priority to. We're looking for things that result in measurable water quality improvement. We're a water quality grant. But guess what? If you hold back your stormwater, your floodwater, you do some retrofitting, we do some infiltration, you put those things, runoff controls and all that, you put those in place, I guess your water quality might improve. And then we do collect water quality data that's post-project. Right now we do allow that. But the last thing that we're really pushing that I really wanted to talk about is we install best management practices that are green infrastructure and low impact development. In fact, we like using the GIs that are from the Georgia Stormwater Management Manual, which is the next slide. All right, those of you that have an MS4, this should not be a new document to you. This is the 2016 updated Georgia Stormwater Management Manual that has all the technical information that you need for your stormwater projects that you use with your MS4. Now, these lists right here, this is the list of all the BMPs, which most of them are actually green infrastructure types. These are the type of BMPs that my grant will pay for. And guess what? These are the type of BMPs that GIFA will pay for. So these are the type of BMPs that could be used for stormwater. So there's lots of different ways that you can use this particular document, but I wanted to show where the overlap is. So I'm going to show you some examples of green infrastructure projects that 319 has funded, and pictures are always kind of pretty. So here's a great example. First of all is Sandy Springs. It's the Marsh Creek Constructed Wetlands, which is part of a regional bioretention. This particular wetland is part of a bigger park. The water comes into the wetland, and then if it gets too high, it overflows to a pond. And then there's some aeration there, and then it just charges out. And they made a park around it. So in addition to solving their runoff issues and water quality issues, they have an amenity now. All right, next slide. Boone Boulevard, GI. Boone Boulevard was actually part of a larger project, which is Proctor Creek, the Proctor Creek Watershed Restoration Project the City of Atlanta has. Huge project. We just paid for a very small part of it, which was stormwater planters or tree cells. These were tree cells that were installed alongside of Boone Boulevard. Next slide. This is an example of the education and outreach sign that they developed, and they have out there on Boone Boulevard to explain to the public what these very odd-looking structures on the side are for. Next slide. Here's another great one. The city of Roswell installed permeable pavers along Mount Zion Circle, and in another area, I don't remember the name of the street, but there's another area where they did some redevelopment, and so they did some permeable pavers retrofitting in that area also. We've also done permeable pavers down in the St. Mary's area. It's been pretty popular, actually. Next slide. All right, and this is the city of Gainesville, Flat Creek. This is a pretty extreme example. So this was the Flat Creek stream restoration and also a bioretention. What you see on the left-hand side is it's Flat Creek that has been, of course, channelized and is in a concrete ditch. It runs between, you can see the fence there, and to the left of it, there's an old abandoned factory. And this was something that Gainesville had. Flat Creek has actually been a stream that they've done several projects on, but in my opinion, this one's been the most extreme. Next slide. This is the fire pond. The fact you can see the factory behind it. What a fire pond was at the time was if you had a factory that had a lot of materials that are prone to be flammable, they would often have their own fire pond next to the factory to pump water in the event caught on fire. So of course this pond had long been abandoned a long time ago. And if you see right behind the pond, you'll see a fence right there, the chain link fence. That's where Flat Creek is, where the channel was, that concrete channel from the previous page. Next slide. And this is the stream restoration. Remember I told you all about the chain link fence on the side, on the left-hand side? They completely removed the concrete. The concrete is gone, and completely rebuild the stream, put in meanders and the flow and all that. They had to do some areas to make sure it armored the J-hooks and all that fun stuff. But this is the actual restored Flat Creek. Next slide. Another picture on the lower left. One thing I want to mention is you notice that they put back in the floodplain. I just really love this particular project. And then the picture above, which looks like a fire pond, but it's not, is the new detention, the new regional detention pond they put in. They did actually go and dig out the old pond and then put in an actual the specs for an actual bioretention. They did put that in, and then they changed the flow and were able to use this thing so it captures now the flow coming off of a residential area and an industrial area. This is an amenity now for the city of Gainesville. Next slide. All right, so moving on. We're going to talk about the Regional Water Plan C grant. This is the other grant that I help administer. Now, this provides funding for, I have to tell you, the greatest thing about the Regional Water Plan C grant is it will pay for everything and anything water, even things that are permit required. If it's something that's required by your permit, guess what? The C grant may actually pay for it for you. We are implementing management practices from the regional water plans, and I hope you all know what those are. The type of projects we're looking for are address critical information and data needs. We need data needs to update the plans, tracking and analyzing monitoring data, preparing and distributing technical guidance, and provide technical assistance. In a sense, we're implementing these plans. Next slide. All right, so some of you may say, we have regional water councils. We do, and this is a map of all of our regional water councils. Now, there are 10 regional water councils, and then there's the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District. And as you can see, it's organized by county, loosely following the water basins. Now, here's the thing: the C grant will only implement the 10 regional water council plans, not the Metro North Georgia. However, we've had a couple situations where the project was in a neighboring county upstream that was in the Metro North Georgia, but the county and the region below really wanted the project because it improved the water that flowed down to that council. So in those cases, the council would provide a letter of support for a metro project. The majority of these are not in the Metro North Georgia district, but elsewhere in the state. Next slide. All right, so I want you to see these because we struggle with these because this is something kind of new to the state, even though this has been going on now for over 7-8 years now. These are the regional water plans. They're updated every 5 years. I'm going to step you through really quickly to show you how you apply for a C grant, all right? So this is what a plan looks like. Next slide. All right. In the Upper Oconee Plan, in Section 6, are management practices. There's lots of different types of management practices. There's water quality management practices, water supply practices, water conservation practices, lots of different types of practices. But I'm going to focus on just 2 particular practices that may sound familiar to you. In this particular situation, in Table 6, which is Section 6, there is a water quality practice called Encourage Floodplain Management and Flood Damage Protection. There's a practice there. There's a definition of the practice and the action. We already have a management practice in the plan that is addressing floodplain and flood management. Next slide. Well, here's another one. Water Quality 7, another management practice, which is Encourage General Stormwater Practices. And it has a list of what the actions that we're looking for and the relationship of the action to the vision and the goals. Okay, so this plan, their priorities are they want to encourage more general stormwater practices in the region. Okay, great. Next slide. So if we go to Section 7, remember we're in Section 6. Section 6 actually introduces the management practice. They're pretty vague. They're pretty general. Section 7 is the implementation of the management practices. So they're a repeat of the same practices that shows what type of short-term and long-term actions that we're hoping to see with those practices, or rather that the Upper Oconee Regional Water Council is hoping to see with the practices. Notice again, floodplain and stormwater practices. So if you are in the Upper Oconee Regional Water Council area, or county or a city, and let's say, in the next couple of years, you have a good chance you're going to be becoming an MS4, And you need to go ahead and get some planning and work going up and going now to participate, to anticipate for it. Maybe you might need a stormwater plan, or like an asset management system with GIS, or other type of planning things that get in good shape for becoming becoming part of an MS4. Or if maybe you're already an MS4, but not in the metro area, sorry, but if you're already an MS4 and you would like to do some additional planning or additional work having to do with flooding or stormwater, the Regional Water Plan C grant can pay that for you. So it's very, very general, and you almost like, what's the hook? What is the hitch here? And the hitch is, well, next slide. You got to put in 10% cash match. And that means cash match. That has been a stumbling block for several cities, smaller cities and counties, coming up with that additional 10%. The max we allow is $75,000. It's not that big of a grant, so it really can only be used for doing some sort of planning. Most of these grants have been getting data, data development, accessing data, doing some education and outreach. But we've had a couple asset management projects, and we've also had some stormwater planning projects. This is just got to come up with the 10% match. The cost share is 60-40, and how it breaks out is if you ask for the max of $75,000, you have to put in $12,500 of cash match. You have to identify which regional water plan you're implementing, and remember, I just showed you how to do it. You go to Section 6. You find your management practices, you find your Section 7, you find your implementation, there you go, you've identified them. And then you have to have a letter of endorsement from your council chair. And if you don't know who that is, we'd be more than happy to help you and guide you to who that individual is. And I want to mention that we're going to be accepting applications for the Regional Water Planning C grant starting in July 2021. All right, next slide. All right, so now I want to talk real quickly about some other opportunities that may not necessarily be flooding or stormwater, but over the years I have met individuals that are working for cities and counties. You wear many hats. You probably do flooding, you do stormwater, you answer other questions, you may know people, you work with your parks and recreation people, and you might get questions a lot of times about can someone from the county or state pay for something here in the park? Can somebody in the county help here something with our education center? So I want you to be aware of this fantastic site called the Environmental Education in Georgia site, where we have a grant list. And I would call these micro grants. Many of them are not really big, and most of them are from nonprofits or foundations of larger corporations, just trying to spread the generous amount around everybody else, I guess, whatever, local governments or whatever and all that. But I've found that you can find things on here for like pollinators, community gardens, a lot of things for K through 12 educational. It's lots of great things. I actually a couple of years ago I had someone from the public call me, and she saw the word seed, and so she thought it was a community garden grant, even though she had not read the grant guidelines. And so she was very adamant that she was going to apply for this grant. And the more I kept talking to her about the Regional Water Plan Seed grant, I had to explain to her what you were trying to accomplish, this grant can't pay for. And I ended up sending her to this website. So if you ever get those odd questions, take a look at this particular website. Next slide. All right. So the last, second to last slide I want to mention about sources is the Foundation Directory Online and the Camden Learning Center. Now, here's my disclaimer. This is a private company, so I'm not endorsing this per se, but I'm letting you know that this is available. The Foundation Directory Online is actually one of the largest databases of nonprofit grants that you can find. It's one of the bigger ones. And there is a subscription to it. However, many cities and county library systems have a subscription to this. Any type of nonprofit foundation you can think of is part of this database. Just plethora of information that's available. Again, you have to have a subscription or get access to it through your library. But I wanted to mention the Candid Learning. Candid is actually the company that owns the Foundation Directory Online, but Candid Learning has a fantastic online training on how to apply for grants. I am actually a volunteer in a nonprofit that's not environmental related. And the director of the nonprofit is who told me about this, actually. And she has taken several training courses through the Candid Learning and been quite successful for our nonprofit getting some community grants. And she learned these things through Candid Learning. So if you're new to grant writing, and don't limit to yourself to just the main big boys I've mentioned earlier. You could use, you need some training, use the Candid Learning, and if you can get a hold of subscription to the Foundation Directory Online, I suggest you take a look at it. All right, next slide. Oh, we got a poll question. Oh my goodness, how are we doing on time? All right. I was so scared. Oh, I can't believe it. 40 minutes. I'm always running late. This is fantastic. All right, so we have another poll question. All right, so you need a grant or a loan. What are the things you should know or do before you apply for a grant or a loan? Should you A, read the guidelines to make sure your project fits the criteria, mission, and goals of the grant or loan? Reach out to the contact person of the grant announcement to discuss your project. Know your deadlines and submit the right attachments with supporting documents. That sounds good. Or, all of the above. So please make your selection in the poll, not in the chat. And also, if you need CECs or continuing education credits, please make sure that you've answered both polls. All right. All right, we're going to give you all about 10 more seconds. All right, why don't we, why don't we go ahead and close the poll? And then we're going to see the results. Polls can be tricky sometimes. Who knows what these answers could be? One moment. All of the above. And one person said, reach out to the well, okay, I'll give you that. But the answer is D, all of the above. So let's talk about that, which is our next slide. So I would like to, I started doing this. I actually used to never have a slide, but I started doing this at the end of my presentations, and I found it's been quite helpful to individuals who are new into the grant process or loan process. So what are the things you should know before you apply for a grant? I'm speaking from the funder side, all right? First thing is, please read the guidelines and make sure your project fits the criteria, mission, and goal of the grant. If you've ever been around me long enough, you will always hear me say, do not try to make the grant fit your project. Do it the other way around. You make your project fit the grant. All right. And what I mean by that is people will oftentimes almost in silo tunnel vision. This is a flood project. This is a stormwater project. This is they go ahead and they put their project kind of in a box, not seeing other wonderful benefits your project could have. And then they try to take that and fit it into other criteria, other circles and triangles and whatever that the other grants are trying to do. And don't do that. What you need to do is you need to look at the grant, or what the grant could be a flood hazardous, pre-mitigation grant. The grant could be a community block grant. The grant could be a 319. What is the intent of the grant? And make sure your project is answering the intent of that grant. All right. Example, a couple of years ago, we had a fantastic application fantastic application. A particular applicant submitted this application that the project was amazing. They had the details we really like. It was wonderful. However, they had no plan. The listed stream was several miles away. And the project, while it was a phenomenal project, showed no water quality benefits whatsoever. And it was not funded. And if they had taken it a step further, there might have been a possibility, but it was very obvious they didn't read the guidelines. Wasn't funded. So even though some of these guidelines may seem tedious, I recommend that you do look them over. All right. The second thing that happened also with that particular project was they never attended a pre-application meeting, and they never reached out to our contact person of the grant, who at the time was Joyce. So always reach out to the contact person of your grant announcement to discuss your project. Because those of us on this end, majority of the time, we want you to be successful, or we want to help you not waste your time. Or we may actually know a better grant where there'll be a better fit for your project. So always reach out to your grant, the grant contact. Those people that have known me for a long time that reach out to me, sometimes they'll say, Barbara, this project's going to do ABC. And sometimes when they're done talking to me, their project is doing ABC and XYZ, and it's much more competitive. All right. Those on this side, we want to help you have successful projects. Finally, please know your deadlines. Pay attention to the deadlines. Nothing is worse than receiving a project a couple days after, an application a couple days after the deadline. Know that, please remember and look to see what attachments need to be included, supporting documentation we require. If you're doing green infrastructure, and you're doing green infrastructure on MS4, we require a letter of insurance that this is above and beyond your permit. We need to see that. There needs to be a disclaimer saying that the match is from a non-federal source. And things like that. Read the guidelines and submit the right attachments. Also, double check when you submit your attachments. There's some electronic systems you just upload your attachments and all that. A few years ago, we're in the dark ages, but we were still receiving all the application and attachments on a CD. We had a contractor, or rather applicant, who forgot to submit the application. We worked with them and we got them through. But just check your supporting documents. If you say in your application, see supporting documentation XYZ, have supporting documentation XYZ. All right. And really, that's all I can say about funding from the funder's point of view. But all I know is we really, really love helping our applicants be successful. And that's all I can offer right now with the grant application approach. I think we have any more slides? What's our next slide? Yes, Barbara, what was that link again? So the next 3 slides show the links to the pages that I mentioned earlier. So there's no need for you to write them all down. Of course, there's the GEMA grants, US EPA, rural development, next slide, Department of Community Affairs, GIFA, the Funders Forum, next slide. Of course, our grants, 319. By the way, I failed to mention, I hear my boss yelling at my ear. We're going to be accepting, opening the application period for 319 at the end of this month, and I believe the deadline at the end of March. So if you have a project, maybe a grant infrastructure project, please come talk to us. The regional water plan C grant, the EE in Georgia. Earlier today, we were noticing the EE in Georgia website was down, but that is the correct link. And then, of course, the Candid Learning. And next slide. Whew, that's me. I'm easier to get a hold of via email if you ever have any questions. And I'm done. I'm turning this back over to Emily.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I do appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind addressing real quick, just to make sure everybody heard you say this, when you're applying for a grant, such as the 319, and you have the matching funds, what are things that you can do to have that match?
Oh, thank you. That's a great, great question. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. Yeah, I was trying to stay on track here. The 319 matching funds are in-kind funds, so that could be for a lot of grant infrastructure projects. Those are really expensive projects, so the project itself might be at like $900,000, and so whatever the city or county is putting in from SPLOS or whatever they're putting in, the 319 would pay for the other part. You have to be careful though. Right now, the in-kind match source cannot be another federal source. So right now, it can't be GIFA funding. We're trying to work through that, but usually we see funding coming from SPLOS, stormwater utilities, and such. For smaller applicants and contractors, I have several projects with regional development councils, or RDNCs. Those oftentimes their match comes from volunteers. We have volunteer time. Sometimes it might be their own salaries and their time. So the in-kind match could really be a whole wide range of things. It just cannot be another federal source. But we're working through that.
Thank you, Barbara, for that very informative webinar. I hope we all have great ideas for funding sources now. We'll keep the chat open for a few more minutes so you can still submit a question. Please be sure to include your email address along with the question so we can follow up with you. Again, we're offering 1 continuing education credit for today's session, available only to certified floodplain managers that completed the polling questions and provide their name and email address right now. So please be sure that you included your email address when you put your name in the chat. We will be distributing the slide deck and a survey that we greatly appreciate you completing. If you requested certified or continuing education credits for your CFM, those certificates will be emailed separately. Finally, please mark March 3rd from 12 to 1 on your calendar for the next Lunch and Learn, where we have Joe Martinenza discuss how to obtain base flood elevations and approximate A zones. This can be a challenge, especially for those who don't have an engineering background like myself. Georgia DNR has developed several tools to assist communities which make the process much easier. One is a map viewer, and the other is a model repository. This Lunch and Learn will describe those tools while providing detailed instructions on how to use them. And the uses for these tools go well beyond the Zone A base flood elevation determinations. So make sure you sign up for the next Lunch and Learn, and thank you for attending today's event. For those who don't have any questions, this is the end of our Lunch and Learn webinar. Please have a great day. Thank you.
If you want to ask any questions, feel free to reach out to me on my email.